que tu vas faire?
Welcome to Recap King. In this video, we will explain The Swarm. This movie tells the story of a woman who feeds her grasshopper with the blood from her body. When the grasshoppers grow and prefer to suck blood, the real terror appears. How do they survive the attacks of human blood-sucking locusts? Let's find out in The Swarm. The Swarm begins by showing Virginie, a widow who lives in rural France with her 2 children. Virginie was seen taking care of her husband's grasshopper farm and working day and night because the grasshopper farm was her only source of livelihood to meet the needs of her life and her 2 children. However, her grasshopper snack business has recently experienced a decline because the grasshoppers raised cannot reproduce in large numbers and many also die. Virginie also complained about the problems she faced in a grasshopper farmer community forum. However, she has made suggestions and solutions from community members and still does not produce significant results. In the afternoon, Virginie was visited by a prospective customer who intended to buy her grasshoppers in large quantities as raw materials for locust snacks, but the customer asked for an insane discount, even though she had sold the grasshoppers at a fairly cheap price. The customer finally canceled his purchase, even though Virginie struggled to get the wooden crates filled with grasshoppers out. After that, Virginie took her eldest child, Laura, to find fresh grass to feed the grasshoppers. Laura, who found out about the canceled purchase of grasshoppers, looked disappointed and sad because again they did not get income to meet their daily needs. Virginie also had to rack her brain again to get money for urgent needs. Finally, Virginie was forced to borrow money from her friend, Karim, who is a wine farmer. Karim agreed to lend Virginie the money. Not only that, he also asked his friends to help Virginie by buying products from her grasshopper farm. Long story short, while skating in cyberspace, Laura saw a video post uploaded by one of her school friends. In the online post, her friend made fun of Laura and her family who run a grasshopper farm business, which he said was disgusting. Of course, Laura was very upset to be humiliated like that by her friends. On the other hand, Gaston, Laura's brother, realizes that grasshoppers from her mother's farm are attracted to flesh and blood after one of her pet grasshoppers eats the wound on his hand. The next day, Laura and Gaston are invited by their mother to the city. While Virginie was marketing her locust snack products to grocery stores in the city, Laura, who was waiting in the car, spotted Kevin, her schoolmate who posted a video online to embarrass herself and her family. Laura went to Kevin and had a fight with him. Because Kevin's body is bigger and stronger than Laura's, Kevin easily punches her in the face. Luckily, Virginie rushed to save her daughter. When she got home, Virginie got a call from Karim's friend who wanted to buy her grasshoppers in bulk, and the potential buyers offered a very high price. Virginie was confused and told this to Laura while treating the bruises on her face. Virginie then tells Laura that she intends to move out and start a new life elsewhere with Laura and Gaston when all the produce from her grasshopper farm is sold out. Hearing this, Laura was happy because it meant that she would no longer be the object of ridicule from her friends. The next day, Brian, Karim's friend who was about to buy products from Virginie's grasshopper farm, came. However, the man looked disappointed because Virginie's grasshoppers were so thin. Because the product he was about to buy was deemed unworthy, Brian immediately lowered the price unilaterally. Obviously, this makes Virginie furious. She went berserk and slammed out the wooden crates filled with grasshoppers that she had put in Brian's car. Frustrated by the fact that no one was willing to spend more money on locust products from her farm or just buy from her out of pity for her and feeling bad for Karim, she went to her grasshopper cage and angrily ransacked the nest, but she eventually slipped and fell unconscious. After a while, the grasshoppers sucked the blood from Virginie's wound. After waking up, Virginie panicked when she found grasshoppers swarming her body and eating from the wound on her arm. She quickly fled from the cage. The next day, Virginie heard an unusual noise from inside the grasshopper cage. Overnight, the grasshoppers from Virginie's farm became more aggressive and seemed to follow her movements. Virginie, who observed the huge changes in her grasshoppers, assumed that the grasshoppers were reacting to the wound on her arm. Out of curiosity, she opened some of the cage and removed the bandage on her arm. Sure enough, the locusts started swarming her arm and eating flesh and blood from the wound on her arm. Finally, Virginie entered the cage with special protective clothing to avoid the grasshoppers' attack. How surprised she was to find out that the locusts not only grew fat after eating the flesh and sucking the blood from the wounds, but also multiplying profusely. As the grasshoppers continued to reproduce rapidly, she started building new cages with Karim's help. Laura, who saw this, became very upset because her mother was actually developing a business bullied by her school friends. That evening, Virginie returned to feeding her grasshoppers with flesh and blood from the gaping wound on her arm. Even though her actions were very dangerous, she was still willing to do it to sell more locust products and get bigger profits to meet the needs of her family and make her children happy. Sometime later, Virginie's locust harvest was bountiful. She went back to Brian and offered the grasshoppers, which were now fatter and fresher. Brian was happy and bought grasshopper products from Virginie's farm at a reasonable price. Since it was impossible to continuously feed the grasshoppers with their flesh and blood, she thought of buying fresh blood supplies from the butcher shop. Not long after, an order of blood from the butcher shop arrived. The salesman looked curious and asked Virginie what that much blood was for, but she only answered perfunctorily. Without further ado, she immediately mixed fresh blood from the butcher shop with jelly flour so that the blood turned into solid clots, and after that, she fed the grasshoppers. Meanwhile, Laura, increasingly frustrated by her mother's obsession with increasing her locust products business, is approached by a friend who tries to cheer her up. However, Laura was already angry with her mother for not keeping her promise to stop selling locust products and seemed not to care about the bullying she had to experience at school. After hearing the noise from the grasshopper cage, Laura became even more annoyed and immediately vented her frustration by tearing apart one of the nests and leaving from there. On the other hand, Gaston, who was in the truck near the cage, was shocked to see a swarm of locusts flying out of the cage and rushing towards him. Gaston immediately took cover. Apparently the locust swarms were after Huguette, his pet goat who was tied behind his back. However, after the locust swarm attacked the truck and left, Huguette was nowhere to be seen. When his mother returned from a trip to town, Gaston immediately came to his mother crying hysterically because Huguette had disappeared after they were attacked by a swarm of locusts. A panicked Virginie immediately asked Gaston to stay in the house, while she rushed to find Huguette. Virginie found Huguette in the field. Gaston's pet goat was dead and its body was covered in thousands of grasshoppers gnawing at him. Virginie looked very shocked and confused. She then moved the goat carcass to a safe place. Virginie didn't tell Gaston she had found the goat and made up excuses when she got home. Gaston was very disappointed, then left his mother. Laura, who knows this, becomes increasingly annoyed with her mother and blames her for what happened to Huguette. But Virginie was also annoyed with her eldest child because the cause of all the chaos that resulted in the locusts coming out of their nest and killing Huguette was Laura herself. A few days later, Virginie again contacted the butcher shop to get fresh blood, but because she kept ordering fresh blood supplies without giving any clear reason, the seller became suspicious and decided to no longer comply with her request for fear that she would misuse the animal's blood and get her into trouble. That night, Virginie, who was thinking about getting fresh blood to feed her grasshoppers, heard the barking of her neighbor's dog. Without thinking, she decided to feed the dog to her flock of grasshoppers. It didn't stop there. She was also desperate to feed her grasshoppers with Huguette's carcass. She did all that to make her grasshopper cattle continue to get food intake and the grasshopper harvest continued to be abundant. But of course she couldn't keep feeding her grasshoppers at the expense of her neighbor's pets. She was again feeling frustrated and confused. One day, Laura, who had just come home after dropping Gaston to the soccer camp, tried to find her mother at home. Laura went to her mother's room and found it open and on the floor strewn with blood-stained clothes. Feeling worried, she rushed to the grasshopper cage and found her mother who was only wearing underwear and surrounded her body by grasshoppers. Immediately Laura was shocked and ran back to the house. Laura panicked, then contacted Karim via text message and told him to come to her home because her mother was unwell. Not long after, Karim met Virginie who was making flour dough for her grasshopper snack. Karim asked how she was, but Virginie covered up the truth and tried to avoid Karim. But she was too weak from losing a lot of blood after sacrificing herself to feed the locusts, and was barely able to walk. Karim urged Virginie to tell the truth, but she still dodged. After taking Virginie to her room, Karim met Laura in the kitchen to ask what really happened. Laura suggested to Karim to see for himself the truth in the grasshopper cage. Just as Laura was about to tell Karim what her mother had been doing in the cage this afternoon, Virginie suddenly appeared behind them. Virginie and Karim then argued because Virginie had cornered Laura too much and Karim tried to defend the child. Meanwhile, at Virginie's grasshopper farm, one of her neighbors goes to the grasshopper kennel to look for her dog who has been missing for days. The old man was very curious about the unusual noise of locusts and decided to open one of the locust nests. But unexpectedly, the locusts instead attacked the old man and devoured him to death. Karim, who went to the grasshopper cage to check on the situation, was very surprised when he found the body of an old man which was infested with thousands of grasshoppers. After learning the secret Virginie had hidden about her grasshoppers preying on other living things, Karim finally took quick action. He intended to destroy the deadly grasshopper farm by burning it. Meanwhile, Virginie, furious at Laura for complaining about her actions to Karim, tries to teach her a lesson, but Laura tried to hide in her room, avoiding her mother who was emotionally and mentally unstable. Seeing the fire that devoured her grasshopper farm, Virginie tried to put out the fire, but was prevented by Karim. Karim and Virginie watched how a large swarm of locusts escaped by flying from the burning cage. Karim tried to save himself by returning to Virginie's house and the locusts began to follow him and attack the house. Virginie, who was putting out the fire, heard Laura scream. She then ran into the house to save her child. But Laura was nowhere to be found, and she instead found Karim dead and his body being swarmed by thousands of predatory locusts. Laura had already fled into the woods near her house, trying to avoid the locusts that were following her. Laura ran towards the lake and hid under the overturned boat on the shore. The swarm of predatory locusts began to cover the boat, and little by little pushed it into the lake and began to drown Laura. Virginie saw this, immediately cut her palm with a knife and covered her face with blood to lure the swarm of predatory locusts towards her and leave Laura. As expected, the predatory locusts immediately attacked Virginie because they were attracted by her blood. Virginie entered the lake and continued to drown herself until the whole swarm of predatory locusts followed her into the water and died. Laura realized what had happened and immediately swam towards her mother. Luckily, Virginie survived and only received minor injuries. The mother and daughter embraced each other and were relieved when the predatory locust swarms disappeared above them and dawn began to break. The film ends.